The Stranger at Sunset. It was one of those dusky evenings where the world seemed to exhale. The traffic slowed, the breeze cooled, and the golden-orange hue of the sun blanketed the city skyline. In this moment of calm, most people were either heading home from work or preparing for iftar, the evening meal that marks the breaking of the fast during the holy month of Ramadan. In the heart of the city, tucked away between two tall buildings, was a small, humble mosque. It wasn't adorned with domes or towering minarets. No, this one was different. It was community-built, paint-chipped, walls cracked in places, but filled with life, love, and laughter. A place where the neighborhood gathered not just to pray but to connect, to eat together, to reflect. That evening, a stranger walked down the alley leading to the mosque. He wore a black hoodie, his hands tucked into the front pocket, head slightly bowed. A neatly trimmed beard lined his face, and his stride was relaxed but purposeful. He walked past street vendors packing up their carts, children playing with marbles, and the sweet scent of roasted dates in the air. The stranger paused. From inside the mosque, he heard it, the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer. It wasn't booming through loudspeakers. It was soft, almost whispered, yet it carried a warmth that drew him closer. There was something peaceful in the cadence, something that invited curiosity rather than demanded attention. He looked up. A hand-painted wooden sign read, Masjid al-Nur, all are welcome. He took a deep breath and stepped in. Inside the mosque. As he walked in, the first thing he noticed wasn't the architecture. It was the smell. Sandalwood incense mixed with the aroma of lentil soup and freshly baked bread. He removed his shoes and stepped onto the cool marble floor. The soft hum of conversations and distant recitations filled the air. People were smiling. Some were cutting fruit, others laying down mats, and a few were moving chairs and water jugs. No one gave him more than a passing glance. No double takes, no gasps, just a polite smile here and there. A small boy, around 10 years old, approached him. His cheeks were slightly smudged with flour, and he held a bowl of dates in his hands. "Assalamu alaikum," the boy said, eyes wide. "Are you here to help with iftar?" The stranger hesitated, then smiled. "Yes," he said, his voice low and gentle. "I'd love to." He rolled up his sleeves. The stranger was Keanu Reeves. Of course, most of the world knew him as Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's beloved actor, known for The Matrix, John Wick, and a dozen other iconic films. But here, in this mosque, in this alley, during this sacred time, he was just a man. No cameras, no entourage, no designer shades, just Keanu, a humble human being seeking something more meaningful than fame. As he entered the kitchen area, he was handed an apron. Volunteers were slicing cucumbers, stirring large pots of curry, and folding samosas. "Can you stir this, please?" an older man asked, handing him a long wooden spoon. Keanu smiled. Of course. For the next hour, he stirred, chopped, and listened. He listened to conversations about school exams, rising grocery prices, and family back home in other countries. He heard laughter, felt joy, and observed a deep sense of togetherness that was hard to find in the chaotic world outside. Still, no one recognized him, or perhaps they did, but chose to let him be. Breaking the fast. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a voice from the prayer hall announced the time for Maghrib. Plates were quickly filled, and people sat shoulder to shoulder on long carpets. Keanu found himself beside the same little boy who had first greeted him. "We break fast with dates and water," the boy explained, offering Keanu a small bowl. Keanu nodded and mimicked the gesture, holding the date, whispering a soft "thank you," and taking the bite. It was sweet, grounding, and strangely emotional. Everyone around him began to eat, not in silence, but with gratitude. You could feel it in the air. The stillness, the peace. It wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about community, about presence. That's when an elderly man across from Keanu leaned in. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, eyes twinkling. Keanu chuckled. "Not really." "You're welcome anytime," the man said, "even after Ramadan." Keanu's smile widened. "Thank you. That means a lot." After the meal, once everyone had eaten, some stayed for prayer, while others remained in the dining area, cleaning up. Keanu insisted on staying behind to help. He carried trays, wiped tables, and washed dishes. It was during this cleanup that something remarkable happened. A young woman entered, visibly distressed. Her hijab was slightly disheveled, and her hands were shaking. She clutched a small piece of paper, clearly unsure of who to approach. The imam, who had been helping organize food, noticed her and gently guided her to a nearby bench. Keanu, who happened to be nearby, watched silently. The woman explained her situation. She had lost her job 2 weeks ago. Her mother was ill, her rent was due, and she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She hadn't come for charity, just food for her mother. That's all. The imam nodded, already reaching for one of the takeaway boxes. Without saying a word, Keanu reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed the woman a folded wad of cash. Quietly, discreetly. He didn't speak. He didn't make a show. He simply placed the money in her hand, smiled softly, and went back to cleaning trays. Tears welled up in her eyes, but before she could say anything, he was gone. The moment it all changed. By the time the night ended, whispers had begun. A few teenagers had finally recognized him from a distance. A selfie here, a polite nod there. But by then, the night had already unfolded. The woman, still holding the cash and takeaway, asked the imam, "Who was that man?" The imam, a wise man in his 60s, just smiled. "Someone who understands what it means to give quietly." Back into the night. As Keanu left the mosque and stepped into the quiet alley once again, he looked up at the sky. The stars had begun to appear, faint but steady. He took a deep breath and walked on. For him, it wasn't just about charity or even kindness. It was about feeling connected again. About stepping out of a world that revolved around red carpets and stepping into one that revolved around compassion. What he didn't know then, what he couldn't know, was that his simple gesture, that quiet evening, would become a story told for weeks. Not because he was famous, but because kindness, when given humbly, changes everything. Whispers of gratitude. The morning after Keanu Reeves quietly walked away from the mosque, the air in the neighborhood was unusually vibrant. Not the noisy kind, no honking horns or loud radios, but something gentler, softer, like a fresh wind had passed through the community, stirring hearts instead of leaves. The little boy who had first greeted Keanu the night before, Yusuf, was now at his kitchen table, recounting the entire evening to his grandmother between bites of warm bread and honey. "He just helped, Nani," Yusuf said, wide-eyed, like a real volunteer. No one told him to. He just did it. His grandmother smiled, ruffling his hair. "That is what real people do, my love. They help when no one is watching." Yusuf frowned, searching for words. But Nani, that man was him. Keanu Reeves. From the movies. Like the one who saves the world and stuff. Her smile faded into something deeper. Then maybe he was saving something last night too. The Imam's reflection. Imam Karim stood at the pulpit of Masjid al-Noor that afternoon, watching people filter in for door prayer. He had been in this role for almost 20 years, and in that time, he'd seen faces come and go, tears and laughter, weddings and funerals. But last night was something different. Not because a celebrity had entered his mosque, but because of how that man had entered, quiet, respectful, generous, and how he had left, without asking for a single thing. It wasn't until after the mosque was nearly empty that Kareem found the woman Keanu had helped still sitting quietly in the women's prayer section, gently rocking back and forth, clutching a box of food and a folded piece of paper. When he approached her, she held out the note. It was a receipt. On the back, a simple message. This is just a small gesture. Please take care of yourself. You are not alone in this world. K. No contact number. No Instagram handle. Just an initial and a kind message. Kareem tucked it into his pocket with reverence. Ya Allah, he whispered. If this is how you send reminders of your mercy, then we have truly been blessed. The cafe down the road, a few blocks away, in a small coffee shop that faced the alley leading to the mosque, a teenage girl named Salma uploaded a single photo to her private Instagram story. A blurry snapshot of Keanu Reeves holding a tray of samosas, laughing with one of the elderly uncles who always made jokes in Urdu no one understood. She captioned it simply, Keanu Reeves served us iftar last night. No cameras, just heart. She didn't think much of it. Her followers were mostly friends from school, but one of them took a screenshot and shared it. Then another. By late afternoon, it was everywhere. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, TikTok. But none of the shares had footage of him giving money or comforting the young woman. That part, the most powerful part, remained sacred and unshared, preserved in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The echo in the streets. By the evening of the second day, the city buzzed with rumors. Did you hear? Keanu was at Al Noor. He came without any security. Is it for a movie? Why would a big star come to our little mosque? People didn't know what to believe, and most brushed it off as fiction. But those who had been there knew. They didn't need to prove it. Something had changed. The mosque, once only half full during iftar, now overflowed. Not with tourists or fans, but with families. Teenagers who rarely came to prayer. Old men who hadn't stepped foot inside for years. Mothers with children curious to see what all the warmth was about. Not to see Keanu. To feel what he felt. To give what he gave. A conversation in the back room. Later that night, Imam Kareem sat with two members of the mosque committee in the small office at the back of the building. The room was barely big enough for the three of them, filled with old books, mismatched chairs, and a slightly buzzing fluorescent light above. We should do something, said Tariq, a middle-aged man with a booming voice and a thick mustache. A fundraiser. A banner. We could thank him properly. Kareem shook his head. That would defeat the beauty of it, brother. He didn't come here to be thanked. He came to give. But the community is energized now. We could do something with this moment. Zara, the mosque's community coordinator, leaned forward. What if we did the opposite of what he might expect? Instead of spotlighting him, we pass it forward. Kareem's eyes lit up. A kindness campaign. Yes, she smiled. Each person who felt something from his gesture does something for someone else. Quietly. No credit. Just heart. They agreed. The campaign would be simple. 1 night of kindness. 1,000 acts of mercy. They printed small cards with that phrase in gold script, each one with a blank back where people could write a personal message before passing it along with their gesture. A homeless man on 8th Street. 3 nights later, an old man who often sat by a closed grocery store received a hot meal and a folded card from a stranger. He opened it to find, "You are loved. May tonight be warmer than yesterday." A fellow human. He clutched it like a photograph, tears falling freely. He didn't know who wrote it. He didn't need to. The little boy with the broken bike. In another part of town, Yusuf, the boy who first greeted Keanu, was walking home when he saw a classmate, Imran, crying over his broken bicycle. The chain had snapped, and he had no way home. Yusuf knelt beside him, inspected the bike, and without a word, removed his own shoelace to create a temporary fix for the chain. "It'll work for now," he said, smiling. He handed Imran a card. "It's your turn next. Help someone." "Okay." Imran nodded, gripping it like treasure. Back in Keanu's world. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves was back on set. The film he was shooting, ironically titled Silent Storm, was nearing completion. He had barely spoken of the mosque visit, not to the director, not to his assistant, not even to his co-stars. But something had shifted in him. He found himself smiling more, pausing during scenes just to thank the crew, carrying extra sandwiches to set, just in case someone forgets lunch. One day, his makeup artist, Maria, asked him gently, "You seem different. Lighter, maybe." He looked at her and said, "I saw something recently. Something real." That was all he offered. That was all she needed. The media storm, and how he silenced it. When the photo from Salma's story exploded online, the media tried to dig deeper. News agencies reached out to the mosque. Paparazzi camped outside the set. A few even claimed they had exclusive interviews with witnesses, though most were clearly fabricated. But Keanu remained silent. When a reporter finally cornered him at a film premiere and asked directly, "Mr. Reeves, did you really serve food at a mosque during Ramadan?" He paused. The crowd around him fell quiet. Cameras clicked, flashes flickered. And then he smiled gently. "I don't think kindness needs a headline." Then he walked away. Back at the mosque, the kindness campaign took off. Not just in the neighborhood, but in other mosques. Then churches. Then schools. One woman left groceries at her neighbor's door with a note. "A stranger helped me once. I'm just passing it forward." A high school principal read about the campaign and started a Quiet Kindness Week where students helped without recognition. It all traced back to one quiet night, one shared meal, one man who never asked to be seen. Late at night, after the last prayer of the day, Imam Karim stood alone in the mosque. He looked at the wall where children's drawings had begun appearing, of hearts, lanterns, people helping one another. He knelt, whispered a soft prayer of thanks, and smiled. In the back of his mind, he remembered the girl's voice asking, "Who was that man?" And his answer echoed in the silence. "Someone who reminded us who we are." Echoes beyond the mosque. There's a strange thing about kindness. You think it ends the moment you walk away, that it disappears quietly with the smile it leaves behind. But kindness doesn't end. It travels. It flows. Like water seeping into dry ground, it finds cracks and crevices in lives you never imagined touching. Keanu Reeves had left the mosque with no expectations, no applause, no articles, no photographs. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the kindness he sowed was no longer his. It now belonged to the world. A letter from a stranger. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope slipped beneath his hotel room door. The concierge claimed it had been dropped off anonymously. No return address. Just his name handwritten on the front in soft cursive letters. Inside, a folded piece of paper. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me. I wasn't at the mosque that night, but someone you helped me. A woman brought food to my home last week. My mother had passed away, and I hadn't eaten for 2 days. Along with the meal, there was a card that read, 'This kindness came from someone who asked for no thanks.' I found out later she had received help from someone else, and they from someone else. That trail led all the way back to you. I don't want an autograph or a selfie. I just wanted you to know. My heart was breaking, and your quiet act reached it. Thank you, not for saving my life, but for reminding me it was still worth living." A stranger. Keanu sat for a long time after reading the letter. He stared out the hotel window, past the skyline, into the deep blue dusk settling over the city. The light flickered on a distant mosque dome, and in that reflection, he saw something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Purpose. A return visit. 2 days later, Keanu showed up at Masjid al-Noor again. No hoodie this time, no sunglasses, just himself, calm, quiet, open. The volunteers, now familiar with his presence, greeted him warmly. This time, people recognized him, but not in the fan-crazed way. It was different, respectful, grateful. He wasn't a Hollywood star here. He was the man who came back, The Woman and the Garden. At the far end of the mosque, a small neglected courtyard had sat barren for years. It had once been filled with rose bushes and jasmine vines, but time and weather had claimed it. Most people walked past it now, barely noticing the cracked soil. But today, someone had begun pulling weeds. Her name was Amina. She was the same young woman Keanu had quietly helped that first night. With the money he gave, she had paid rent, bought medicine for her mother, and found part-time work at a nearby bookstore. And now, she was here, with a pair of gloves, a shovel, and a pack of seeds in her pocket. "I thought," she said, brushing her scarf back as Keanu stood nearby, "maybe it's time this place bloomed again." He crouched beside her without a word and began digging. That entire afternoon, the two worked in silence, planting, watering, clearing stones. Occasionally, neighbors would peek in, watching the most unlikely duo transform the forgotten space into something alive again. By sunset, the garden wasn't finished, but it had begun. Whispers at the shelter. Across the city, in a small shelter for runaway teens, a young boy named Zaid clutched a small card with shaky hands. He had arrived at the shelter the night before, soaked from rain, too afraid to speak. The card had been left on his pillow that morning by one of the shelter workers. It read, "Your story isn't over. Someone once reminded me that even broken things can become beautiful again. Keep going. A friend." Zaid turned it over and saw the campaign name on the back. One night of kindness, 1,000 acts of mercy. He didn't know the story behind it. But for the first time in months, he smiled. Back in Hollywood. Meanwhile, the industry had begun to take notice. Paparazzi still tried to catch Keanu at flashy events, but they were baffled. He wasn't showing up. He skipped toward ceremonies, declined interviews, turned down brand endorsements. Instead, he asked his agent a simple question. "Can we do something that matters?" His team was confused. "You mean, like a charity?" "No," Keanu said. "I mean something real, something without cameras." That week, he donated the entire back-end profits from one of his films to community food banks across 5 cities. Quietly, without press releases. And still, the story spread. But it was no longer about Keanu Reeves, the actor. It was about something else entirely. The ripple of a gesture, the echo of compassion. A message from the Imam. Imam Karim received a call from a mosque in another country. "Brother," the caller said, "I don't know what happened in your community, but we started the same kindness campaign here. And people are responding. Even the ones who never came to mosque before. They say they feel something different now." Karim smiled gently. "It wasn't us," he replied. "It was just a mirror showing us what we forgot we could be." A conversation between old friends. Later that week, Keanu sat on the mosque steps beside the imam as the call to prayer echoed once again. "Do you think it's strange?" Keanu asked softly. That something so small became this. Karim looked at him with a knowing smile. "There's a saying in our tradition," he said. "Even the flutter of a butterfly's wings can change the course of the universe." Keanu nodded. "I've spent most of my life being seen, but I don't think I was ever really felt. Not like here." The imam's voice lowered. "Then maybe, Keanu, this is the beginning of your real story. An unforgettable night." That evening, as people gathered once more for iftar, something different happened. A line of candles lit the mosque courtyard. The garden was blooming with early sprouts. Children were handing out handwritten cards. Teenagers were helping elders find seats. A group of volunteers organized bags of food for families in need. Keanu stood at the back, away from the spotlight, just observing. And then someone tapped his shoulder. It was Yusuf, the boy from that first night. He held a folded paper in his hands. "I wrote this for you," he said shyly. Keanu unfolded it. A drawing, simple, childlike, of a man standing beside a mosque, his hands open. Above him were hearts, stars, and the words, "Thank you for showing us the way." The camera that was never lifted. A journalist who had been following the whispers of this story finally arrived that night. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, camera in hand, ready to snap the perfect photo of Keanu Reeves serving the community again. But as she raised the lens, she stopped. Something about the scene, the gentle laughter, the kindness flowing without pride, the sacredness of the moment, made her lower the camera. She walked away without a photo. Instead, she wrote a single-line blog post that would go viral. Some stories are too beautiful for headlines. This is one of them. That night, as the city settled into sleep, Keanu walked through the now quiet garden. He ran his fingers through the new soil, watching tiny green shoots reach toward the sky. He remembered the letter from the stranger. He remembered the silence in the mosque. He remembered what it felt like to give, and to receive nothing but peace in return. And in that stillness, Keanu Reeves, actor, icon, wanderer, closed his eyes and whispered, not to anyone else, but to the moment itself, "I came here for a role, but I found a purpose." The Garden of Gratitude. As the days passed, the garden at Masjid al-Noor became something more than a space for flowers and plants. It became a sanctuary, a place where the stories of kindness weren't just shared but nurtured. The garden's transformation mirrored the transformation of the community. Each new blossom, each sprouting leaf a reminder of how something small can take root and grow into something profound. Keanu Reeves, once a stranger to this place, had planted more than just seeds in the soil. He had sown a sense of connection, and as the days of Ramadan continued, that connection spread far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The ripple effect. It wasn't long before the ripple of kindness that had begun with Keanu's simple gesture in the mosque expanded across the city. What had started as one quiet act in the heart of Masjid al-Noor grew into a network of people helping people. It became a movement, a quiet revolution of compassion that spread, almost imperceptibly, throughout the streets and neighborhoods. Yusuf, the young boy who had first guided Keanu to the kitchen that fateful evening, found himself organizing small acts of kindness with his school friends. They would walk the streets, offering food to homeless people, carrying groceries for elderly neighbors, and spending time with those who felt invisible. At first, the acts were simple, nothing more than small, quiet exchanges, a hot cup of tea, a few words of encouragement, a helping hand. But soon they grew. The silent march. One Saturday afternoon, as the sun was beginning to set, a small group gathered at the mosque. It wasn't a protest or a rally. It wasn't about standing out or demanding attention. It was a silent march. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds stood together in the mosque courtyard, each holding a small candle in their hands. There was no agenda, no speeches, just people silently expressing their gratitude and commitment to spreading the kindness they had received. Keanu, who had quietly slipped in without fanfare, stood at the back. His presence wasn't the focus. Not here. It was the shared commitment to something greater than themselves. Yusuf, the boy who had started it all, stood at the front. He held up his candle, its flame flickering gently in the wind, and spoke softly. "We walk in silence because kindness needs no words. We carry these flames, not for ourselves, but to pass them to others." The crowd stood in reverent silence, the city's hum fading into the background as they moved together, one step at a time, down the streets. It wasn't long before others joined, intrigued by the peaceful procession. Some came for the message, some for the curiosity, but many came simply because they felt a pull, a desire to be part of something good. And it was in that moment, walking through the city with their candles glowing, that Keanu realized something profound. This wasn't about him. It had never been. It was about the power of people coming together, people who wanted to make the world a better place, not for recognition, but for the pure joy of giving. The sanctuary garden. Back at the mosque, the garden continued to grow. It became a sanctuary for those seeking peace, a retreat where people could pause, reflect, and find solace in the stillness of nature. The flowers that had been planted weeks earlier now stood tall, their petals open to the sun. The jasmine vines climbed higher, their fragrant blossoms adding their sweetness to the air. But it was the tree at the center of the garden that had become the true heart of the space. It was a fig tree. Keanu had been the one to plant it, carefully tucking its roots into the earth as the evening sun bathed the courtyard in gold. Now, it was flourishing. Its branches were spreading, its leaves vibrant and green. One evening after the iftar meal, Keanu returned to the garden alone. He stood beneath the tree, running his fingers over the smooth bark, listening to the faint rustling of the leaves in the breeze. It was a quiet moment of reflection, but as he stood there, he felt a deep sense of connection. Not just to the mosque, or to the people he had met, but to the world around him. This simple tree, its roots entwined in the earth, had become a symbol of everything he had hoped for, but hadn't known how to find. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, the fragrance of jasmine in the air. And in that moment, he felt at peace. The letter of gratitude. Several days later, a letter arrived for Keanu at his hotel. It wasn't an anonymous letter this time. It was from the Imam of Masjid al-Nur. The letter read, "Dear Keanu, the garden that you planted continues to bloom. More than just flowers, it has become a place of healing. People come to the garden to find peace, to reflect, to restore their hope. And as each new person arrives, they carry with them the seeds of kindness you've sown. Your gesture has sparked something beautiful, something that cannot be measured in fame or fortune, but in hearts touched and lives changed. I cannot thank you enough for what you have done, for this community and for me, but I will try. With heartfelt gratitude, Imam Kareem." Keanu read the letter several times, allowing the words to sink in. He sat in the quiet room of his hotel, the weight of the message heavy on his heart. There was no need for fame, no need for accolades. The simple truth of it all was that he had done something meaningful, and that was enough. But what struck him the most was the idea that his action had created something larger than itself, a ripple of kindness that was now in the hands of others. The community's gift. A week later, a group of women from the mosque's community came to Keanu with an unusual request. They had been inspired by the garden and the kindness campaign and wanted to do something special for him. "I know you didn't expect anything in return," one of them said, her eyes sparkling with warmth, "but we wanted to give you something, a gift that reflects what you've given us." Keanu was humbled. "I didn't do it for a gift. I did it because it felt right." The women smiled. "We understand. But sometimes the act of kindness is the gift. So we'd like to present you with something that symbolizes the heart of this place." They handed him a small ceramic bowl, filled with earth from the garden he had helped cultivate. On the rim of the bowl, inscribed in delicate gold lettering, were the words, "From one seed, many flowers bloom." Keanu took the bowl, his fingers brushing the cool ceramic. It was a gesture so simple, yet so profound. In that moment, he realized that the act of kindness he had started, without fanfare, without expectation, had turned into something far greater than he could have imagined. It had become a living thing, nourished by the hearts of everyone who had been touched by it. The garden's legacy. As Ramadan drew to a close, Masjid al-Nur celebrated the end of the month with a final gathering, a celebration of gratitude and unity. The mosque's courtyard was filled with people from every corner of the community. The garden was in full bloom, its vibrant colors reflecting the joy of the occasion. Keanu stood at the back, surrounded by the quiet hum of conversation. People were laughing, sharing stories, and exchanging gifts. The feeling of community was palpable, and for the first time in a long time, Keanu felt at home. As the evening drew to a close, Imam Kareem stood up and addressed the crowd. His voice, filled with warmth, echoed through the courtyard. "We gather here not just to break our fast," he said, "but to honor the spirit of generosity that lives within us all." And tonight, we honor one of our own, someone who came to us as a stranger but became a part of our family. The crowd turned toward Keanu, who stood quietly at the back. Their applause was gentle, respectful, not for fame, but for the man who had touched their lives in a way that could never be measured in public accolades. Keanu stepped forward, his heart full of gratitude. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "I came here to learn. And I've learned that kindness is something we all have the power to give, no matter who we are." As the crowd stood in applause, Keanu realized that he had found something more valuable than any film role or award could ever give him: a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a deep, abiding connection to something much greater than himself. The gift of giving. The holy month of Ramadan was coming to an end, but something else was just beginning. By now, the story of Keanu Reeves' quiet visit to Masjid al-Noor had gently rippled its way through not just the city, but across borders, screens, and languages. It wasn't the headlines that carried it. It wasn't the photos or videos, because there were none. It was the feeling of it. The warmth, the heart, the unspoken truth that someone so globally recognized could choose humility over spectacle. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the story was this: it didn't stay about him. The return of the givers. 3 days after Eid, the community garden at Masjid al-Noor, once a barren courtyard, now alive with green, hosted a gathering unlike any other. People arrived, not for prayer, not for food, but for one reason: to give. There were no donation jars, no signs, no campaigns. Instead, people came carrying boxes, baskets, envelopes, handwritten notes, books, tools, seedlings, and more. They placed them under the shade of the fig tree, the same tree Keanu had planted with Amina weeks earlier. It started with a man named Idris. He was a mechanic, known for keeping mostly to himself. But on that day, he brought a set of toolkits, still in the box, along with a sign: "For any young person who wants to learn a trade, come to my garage. I'll teach you for free." Then came Layla, a retired schoolteacher. She brought 30 children's books with her favorite stories inscribed inside. "I taught for 40 years, she said, eyes glistening. "It's time I passed the stories on." And then something unexpected happened. A tall, lanky teenager stepped forward. He carried nothing. But when he reached the front, he looked at the crowd, took a breath, and said, "I don't have much, but I have time. If anyone here is lonely or needs someone to talk to, I'll listen. I've needed that before, and I want to give it now." The silence that followed was filled with something more powerful than applause. It was awe. Keanu's quiet return. Keanu stood among them, near the edge of the garden, leaning quietly against a wooden fence. He wore a plain shirt, no hat, no sunglasses this time. There was no need to hide. Here, he wasn't being watched. He was being welcomed. He wasn't the center of attention, and he didn't want to be. He just listened, observed, absorbed. Amina came up beside him, her hands slightly muddy from planting new flowers with the kids. "I think it's working," she said softly. Keanu smiled. "No, I think they're working. I just got the honor of watching it begin." Amina nodded, glancing at the fig tree. "Do you remember when you planted that tree?" He looked at it, now standing strong, its leaves dancing in the wind. "I remember thinking, maybe it wouldn't take root." Amina laughed. "Well, it did, just like you." Stories behind the gifts. Each item brought to the garden came with a story. A woman left a sewing machine under the tree with a note: "This made clothes for my children for 20 years. May it clothe others for 20 more." An elderly man placed a violin in its case on the bench with a sign: "To the next dreamer, play what's in your soul." Even the children joined in. One little girl gave away her favorite pink backpack. Another boy left his most treasured football, slightly worn but still full of life. "I want another kid to score goals with it," he whispered, shyly looking at Keanu from across the garden. Keanu walked over, knelt beside him, and said, "You just gave away something really special." The boy nodded. "My dad said real heroes give when it's hard." Keanu smiled deeply. "Then your dad's a wise man." The unexpected visitor. Just as the sun began to set, a familiar figure walked through the gate. It was the woman from the first night, the one Keanu had helped quietly, anonymously. Amina recognized her first. She was holding her mother's hand. The older woman was frail but smiling, and she clutched a warm bowl of food and a bouquet of jasmine picked from the garden. The younger woman, now visibly stronger and more confident, approached Keanu with tearful eyes. "You helped us when no one else would," she said. "You didn't even ask for our names." Keanu started to reply, but she gently interrupted him. "So I'm giving you mine. I'm Miriam, and this is my mother, Noor." Noor reached out and hugged Keanu without a word. Her grip was soft, but full of meaning. "I brought something," Miriam said, opening her tote bag. "It's not much, but it's from the heart." Inside was a worn family cookbook, handwritten in Arabic and English, with pressed flowers between the pages. She handed it to him. "My grandmother wrote this. I want others to use it here. Maybe it can help feed more people. Maybe it can start more stories." Keanu held the book delicately, as though it were made of glass. "I'll take good care of it," he said softly. The anonymous gift. That night, after everyone had gone home, a small package was found under the fig tree. No note, no name. Inside, a folded black hoodie. Keanu's hoodie, the one he had worn on the first night he entered the mosque alleyway. He recognized it instantly, but there was something different about it. Stitched into the inside seam were 4 simple words. "I saw you give." No one ever claimed the act, but it spoke volumes. Even the smallest gesture had come full circle. The global movement begins. The kindness campaign that began in one mosque garden now had a name. Roots of Mercy. Community centers in other cities began creating their own gardens, inspired by the story. The idea was simple: create a place where kindness could be planted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It wasn't tied to religion, background, or fame. Just humanity. Stories began flooding in from around the world. A cafe owner in Istanbul fed 200 people after seeing a translated article about the campaign. A school in South Africa built a kindness tree, where students hung paper leaves each time they helped someone. A nursing home in Toronto began recording their residents' life lessons and offering them to young volunteers. And everywhere, in small notes, chalk drawings, whispered prayers, Keanu's gesture lived on. A call from home. One evening, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, surrounded by letters and messages from strangers. The bowl of garden soil from Masjid al-Noor rested on the desk, alongside Miriam's family cookbook. His phone buzzed. It was his sister. "Hey," she said. "I saw what you've been doing." Keanu hesitated. "I didn't do it for the news." "I know," she replied gently. "That's why it's beautiful." There was a pause. "You seem lighter," she added. "Are you okay?" Keanu looked at the bowl of earth. He ran his fingers through it gently and replied, "I think, for the first time, in a long time, I am." A final message in the garden. A week later, Keanu returned one last time to the garden. It was quieter now, though still alive with wind, color, and scent. At the base of the fig tree, a new sign had been placed. Not by him, not by the mosque, but by the community. The words read, "This garden was planted by a man who asked for nothing and left us with everything." Keanu placed his hand gently on the bark of the tree. He closed his eyes, listening to the breeze as it whispered through the leaves. And in the sacred stillness of that garden, surrounded by flowers, stories, and love, he whispered a simple prayer of his own. May the giving never end. When the world took notice, kindness doesn't scream. It doesn't demand a stage. It walks quietly through doorways, across borders, through hearts. But once it takes root, when it's real, selfless, and alive, it becomes unstoppable. The story of Masjid al-Noor, the blooming garden, and a Hollywood actor's humble gesture had never been intended to go viral. But it had, not through curated press releases or polished videos, but through human stories. And now, the world was beginning to listen, and more importantly, to feel. A headline without a photo. It started with a journalist from an international magazine. She had been covering humanitarian issues for years, but found herself disillusioned, writing about pain without seeing the healing. She stumbled across the blog post titled "Some Stories Are Too Beautiful for Headlines," written by the reporter who had chosen not to photograph Keanu at the mosque. It shook something in her. She boarded a flight the next day, not with a media crew, but with a small notebook and a heart-craving sincerity. When she arrived at Masjid al-Noor, she was welcomed not with press kits, but with tea. Not interviews, but stories. She stayed for 3 days. She ate iftar with the volunteers. She planted flowers with the children. She prayed, even though she didn't follow the faith. She simply joined in. And when she returned to her desk to write her feature, she titled it, "The Garden That Changed the World." It was 4,000 words of quiet power, not once mentioning Keanu Reeves until the last paragraph. Because the story was never about a celebrity. It was about what one moment of selfless humanity could ignite. Within 48 hours, the article was translated into 32 languages. The spark across borders. In Bangladesh, a village imam read the article aloud during Friday prayers. That weekend, his congregation turned an empty lot behind the mosque into a vegetable garden to feed local families. In Brazil, a community center launched the Garden of Mercy project, planting trees in memory of loved ones lost to violence, and leaving beneath each tree a handwritten message of peace. In Norway, a schoolteacher assigned the article as reading homework. One student, a 10-year-old girl, returned the next day with a plan to start a kindness club. 3 days later, every student had joined. It wasn't hype. It wasn't fandom. It was a quiet revolution. Meanwhile, in Keanu's world, Keanu Reeves, now back in Los Angeles, watched it unfold from a distance, not from a place of ownership, but of reverence. He read letters from Uganda, Korea, Morocco, and New Zealand. He received handmade cards, folded origami, prayers written in Arabic, Hebrew, Hindi, and more. But what moved him most was a video, just 30 seconds long, from a Syrian refugee camp in Lebanon. In it, a group of children were planting flowers in plastic bottles, cut open and filled with dirt. They smiled shyly at the camera. One girl held a sign written in both Arabic and English. "We made a garden because we heard about yours. We hope it grows like your kindness." Keanu had been in dozens of blockbusters. He'd won awards, stood on global stages. But this was his greatest honor. He sat alone in his kitchen that evening, that video still playing in his hands, and whispered, "Thank you." The call that changed everything. 1 week later, Keanu received a call from a familiar voice. It was Imam Karim from Masjid al-Noor. "Brother," he said gently, "we need help." There was an emergency. Flooding had devastated a small town nearby. A flash storm had destroyed homes, displaced families, and wiped out basic utilities. The people had little, and now they had nothing. The roads were closed, and the shelters overwhelmed. The community at Masjid al-Noor, despite their own modest resources, had mobilized quickly. Volunteers were loading vans with food, clothes, water, and supplies. "We are calling it a mercy caravan," the imam explained. "We're not asking for fame, just for hearts." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The mercy caravan. 3 days later, a convoy of 7 vans and 2 trucks rolled toward the flood-hit area. There were no news cameras, no drone shots, just people. Ordinary, everyday people. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Atheists, believers, and doubters, all united by one thing: kindness. Keanu rode in the back of a van with Yusuf and Amina. They packed dry goods, diapers, bottled water, and medical supplies. Yusuf clutched his walkie-talkie like a soldier on a mission. "Do you think they'll be okay?" the boy asked softly. "They will," Keanu replied, "because people like you are coming." When they arrived, they were met with devastation, but also with hope. Despite the damage, families greeted them with hugs. Children helped unload supplies. The local priest opened his half-flooded church as a makeshift shelter. Keanu, along with dozens of volunteers, worked side by side with first responders, not as a celebrity, but as a fellow human. He built tents. He washed dishes. He carried boxes. He sat with a crying father who had lost everything. He helped an elderly woman find her cat under a collapsed porch. There were no red carpets, only muddy streets, and Keanu had never felt more at home. The child and the blanket. That night, as the group prepared to leave, a young boy approached Keanu. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was barefoot, his clothes soaked and stained, but he held something tightly in his arms. A blanket. Old, faded, torn at the edges. "This is for you," the boy said, offering it. Keanu knelt down, humbled. "Are you sure? You might need this." The boy nodded. "Someone helped us. My mom said we should give back. So, this is what I have." Keanu took the blanket gently, his voice caught in his throat. "Thank you. I will treasure it." He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders that night as the caravan returned home, the scent of rain and jasmine still in the air. A letter from the UN. A week after the Mercy Caravan, Keanu received an official letter from the United Nations Humanitarian Division. It praised the campaign's ability to unite people globally without political or religious divides. It asked if he would consider becoming a global peace ambassador. He declined. Instead, he offered something else. "Let me visit the places no one wants to go. Let me sit with the people no one wants to hear. Don't give me a title. Give me a task." They agreed. A garden in every nation. Meanwhile, Roots of Mercy evolved into a full-fledged international movement. Communities began planting mercy gardens in places most in need of healing. A school in Gaza built a rooftop greenhouse named Hope Blooms. A church in Ukraine planted flowers around bombed-out buildings. A prison in California allowed inmates to cultivate herbs for local shelters. In India, an interfaith team created a mobile garden that moved from village to village, teaching children to grow life from the earth. Each one credited the story that began with a Hollywood star walking into a quiet mosque with rolled-up sleeves. And still, Keanu never spoke of it. When asked, he would only say, "I was just one hand in a circle of many." Late one night, back in Los Angeles, Keanu stood on his rooftop, looking out at the city. The blanket from the flood-struck boy was wrapped around his shoulders. Beside him sat a journal. It wasn't filled with movie scripts or production notes. It was filled with stories, names, faces, gardens. He flipped to the last page and wrote in bold letters, "The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more neighbors." He looked up at the stars, smiled, and whispered, "I'm ready for what's next." The final bloom. The world had changed in quiet, profound ways. Not because of a celebrity, not because of a hashtag, but because, somewhere in the heart of a city, one man chose humility over headlines. One simple gesture, rolling up sleeves and serving strangers, had blossomed into a global movement. But now something even deeper was stirring, something no one had planned. An invitation from the world. It began with an idea. Amina, the young woman who once needed help but later helped replant the mosque garden, sat one afternoon beside the fig tree with Yusuf, now proudly leading the mosque's Roots of Mercy youth chapter. They were sketching new layouts for garden beds when Amina paused and looked around the blooming space. "Yusuf," she said thoughtfully, What if we brought everyone here? He blinked. Everyone. Everyone who started gardens. Everyone who gave. Everyone who bloomed. Yusuf's eyes lit up. A global garden gathering. Amina nodded. A festival, not of fame, but of flowers, of kindness, of all that grew from that first night. The world responds. They didn't expect it to actually happen. But when they sent out handwritten invitations, delivered with flower seeds and a pressed card that read, "From one bloom to another," the world responded. From Kenya to Canada, Brazil to Bangladesh, people began booking flights, applying for visas, organizing travel funds, and hand-packing seeds and soil samples to bring as gifts. Even remote villages sent messages, "We cannot come, but our garden stands in your honor." News channels tried to latch onto the event, calling it the Bloom Summit or the Reeves Festival. But the organizers politely declined all media passes. "This isn't a show," they said. "It's a gathering of hearts." Keanu, when asked if he would attend, simply smiled. "I was there at the start. I'll be there at the circle." The day the world came to Masjid al-Nur, it was early spring. The air in the city was thick with the scent of orange blossoms and new beginnings. The streets leading to the mosque were lined with colorful flags, each one representing a country whose community had planted a mercy garden. Inside Masjid al-Nur, the courtyard had transformed. The fig tree stood at the center, now tall, full of leaves, small fruit peeking from its branches. Around it, rows of new garden beds had been added. Spaces were cleared for tents, community meals, and storytelling circles. And they came. Hundreds, thousands, wearing hijabs, kippahs, crosses, and none at all. Holding hands, smiling through tears, clutching envelopes of dried seeds, art, books, and tokens of love. There were no stages, no microphones, no selfies, only sharing. Each attendee had been asked to bring one story of kindness and one seed. The circle of soil. At the center of the event, a large round planter had been prepared, filled with fresh, soft earth. It was called the circle of soil. Every attendee was invited to place their seed or soil sample inside it. By the end of the first day, the planter contained pieces of the earth from over 60 countries. A mother from Yemen poured a pouch of desert sand. A boy from Peru dropped in a small avocado seed. An elder from Japan gently laid in sakura petals, whispering, "For peace." Each one was a prayer, a memory, a gift. And when it was Keanu's turn, he stood silently for a long time. Then he knelt, removed the folded blanket given to him by the flood-struck boy, and pressed it gently into the bottom of the soil ring. For everyone who gave their last, so someone else could keep going. Then he added a single fig seed, taken from the first tree he planted. And the circle was complete. The gift no one expected. On the third day of the gathering, just before the evening call to prayer, Imam Karim took the center space under the fig tree and addressed the crowd. "We have gathered from many places," he said, "but today we are one garden, one family." He turned to Keanu, who stood humbly nearby, hands folded. "And today we offer you something, not from us alone, but from every heart you've touched." A young girl, maybe 9 years old, stepped forward, holding the scroll. "This," she said softly, "is your story." The scroll was unrolled in front of the entire garden. It was over 40 feet long, filled with handwritten letters from across the globe. Each one began with, "Because you gave, I forgave my father, chose not to end my life, helped a stranger who reminded me of you, started again." Keanu didn't cry, but he closed his eyes and bowed his head. And for a full minute, no one spoke. The garden grew still, as if the world itself was pausing to breathe in the beauty of what had bloomed. The last whisper of the garden. As the final day of the gathering arrived, people sat in small groups, trading seeds, stories, hugs, and prayers. One elder, blind, with a walking stick, sat beneath the fig tree and asked for Keanu. When Keanu approached, the elder reached out and held his hand. "Son," he said, "you are famous in the world for the roles you played. But now, the angels know you for the role you lived." Keanu knelt, humbled. "I didn't plan any of this. I was tired of being seen, but never felt." The elder smiled. "Now, you are felt. In gardens you'll never walk through, in stories you'll never hear. But your kindness lives in everyone." The final bloom. That night, as people prepared to leave, something miraculous happened. The fig tree, whose roots had been planted weeks before in humility, blossomed. For the first time, under the moonlight, small white blooms appeared along its branches. Jasmine vines wrapped around it gently, the scent floating through the warm spring air. Someone whispered, "It's blooming, just like the world." Keanu touched the bark of the tree once more, and he understood. Kindness wasn't a moment. It was a legacy. 1 year later, 1 year after the original garden gathering, Mercy Gardens had been planted in over 142 countries. The roots of Mercy curriculum became part of youth education in several schools. The circle of soil, now enclosed in glass, traveled as a living museum of kindness, stopping in cities struck by war, famine, and disaster, bringing comfort and unity. And as for Keanu, he returned to film sets, returned to lines and lighting and stories on screen. But now he also spent half his year visiting communities quietly, building, listening, giving. He never took a photo. He never mentioned the garden in interviews, but those who saw him always noticed. He carried a small cloth pouch in his pocket. Inside, a single seed, because no matter where he went, he was always ready to plant again.